Hey everybody, buckle up, because we're about to dive into a real picnic basket of global conflict over the past decade. Remember 2014? It feels like a lifetime ago, right? We were all humming Pharrell's Happy and trying to figure out what the hell a Yanny or Laurel was. But behind the scenes, things were already getting messy. The Syrian civil war, already a humanitarian catastrophe, was entering its fourth year with no end in sight. ISIS was on the rise, carving out a brutal caliphate across Iraq and Syria. Russia was flexing its muscles, annexing Crimea from Ukraine in a move that shocked the world. And let's not forget the ongoing conflicts in places like Afghanistan, Somalia, and Yemen, often overshadowed but no less devastating. The point is, the seeds of conflict we see blooming today were planted long ago. The past decade has been a stark reminder that peace is a fragile thing, easily shattered by political instability, economic inequality, and good old-fashioned power grabs. So, grab your helmet and flak jacket, folks, because we're going on a trip through the tangled web of global conflict. And trust me, it's going to be a bumpy ride. Now, back in 2014, some folks were feeling pretty optimistic about the state of world peace. It was a time when the world seemed to be moving towards a more harmonious future. People were gathering in parks, holding peace signs, and rallying for a better tomorrow. The air was filled with a sense of hope and possibility. Maybe they were high on Pharrell. His hit song Happy was everywhere, and it felt like the world was dancing to a more positive beat. Music festivals were packed with joyful crowds, and there was a palpable sense of unity and celebration. Maybe they were just wearing rose-colored Google Glass. Technology was advancing rapidly, and it seemed like every new gadget promised to bring us closer together. People were excited about the future, imagining a world where innovation would solve our biggest problems. Whatever the reason, there were some bold claims being tossed around. News outlets and experts were quick to predict a new era of peace and cooperation. Discussions about the end of major conflicts were common, and many believed we were on the brink of a significant shift. One claim was that interstate warfare, the big, messy wars between countries, was a thing of the past. The horrors of the 20th century seemed like distant memories, and there was a growing belief that humanity had learned its lesson. The logic was that globalization and economic interdependence had made war between nations too costly. With economies so intertwined, the idea was that countries would think twice before engaging in conflict. Trade and commerce were seen as the new tools of diplomacy. Another claim was that democracy was on the rise, and democracies don't fight each other, right? The spread of democratic values was seen as a safeguard against war. The belief was that democratic nations, with their emphasis on dialogue and compromise, would naturally avoid conflict. Except when they do. But let's not dwell on pesky details. The reality, of course, is more complicated. Even democracies can find themselves at odds, and political unrest can erupt anywhere. The idealistic view often overlooks the messy, unpredictable nature of human societies. Some experts pointed to the decline in battle deaths as a sign of a more peaceful world. They argued that fewer people were dying in conflicts, which must mean that things were getting better. Reconstruction efforts in war-torn areas were highlighted as evidence of progress. And hey, any drop in body count is a good thing. But focusing solely on that ignores the millions displaced by conflict or suffering under oppressive regimes. The human cost of war isn't just measured in deaths. Displacement, trauma, and loss of livelihood are all part of the grim picture. Others argued that international institutions like the UN were getting better at preventing and resolving conflicts. The idea was that diplomacy and international cooperation were stronger than ever. The UN's efforts in peacekeeping and conflict resolution were often cited as reasons for optimism. Now, the UN certainly tries, bless their hearts, but they often get bogged down by bureaucracy and the self-interest of powerful member states. The effectiveness of international institutions is frequently hampered by political maneuvering and lack of consensus. Look, it's not that these claims were entirely without merit. There have been genuine efforts and some successes in promoting peace and cooperation. Treaties have been signed, and dialogues have been initiated. These are steps in the right direction. There have been some positive developments in international relations. Cultural exchanges and educational programs have brought people from different backgrounds together. These initiatives have fostered understanding and friendship across borders. But the past decade has exposed the flaws in these optimistic narratives. Conflicts have erupted in unexpected places, and old tensions have resurfaced. The world remains a volatile and unpredictable place. The world is a complex place, and conflict, sadly, is never far from the surface. Despite our best efforts, peace remains an elusive goal. The journey towards a truly peaceful world is long and fraught with challenges, but it's a journey we must continue to pursue. Section 4. Old Tensions, New Battlefields. The return of interstate conflict. Remember that whole interstate war is a thing of the past thing? Yeah, about that. Turns out reports of its demise were greatly exaggerated. In fact, the past decade has seen a worrying resurgence of conflict between states, shattering the illusion of lasting peace. One of the most striking examples is the conflict between Israel and Hamas. The two have been locked in a deadly cycle of violence for decades. But the past decade has seen several major flare-ups, resulting in thousands of casualties, mostly Palestinian civilians. These periods of intense fighting have been interspersed with periods of relative calm, but the underlying tensions remain unresolved, making future conflict all but inevitable. Then there's the granddaddy of them all, Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022. This wasn't just some border skirmish. It was the largest military mobilization in Europe since World War II. Putin's war, launched under the flimsy pretext of denazifying Ukraine, sent shockwaves through the international community. It shattered the post-Cold War order and raised fears of a wider conflict between nuclear-armed powers. These examples highlight a worrying trend: the erosion of international norms, the resurgence of nationalism, and a willingness to use military force to achieve geopolitical objectives. The ghosts of 20th century conflicts are back, baby, and they brought snacks. Section 5. Power plays and proxy wars. External actors fueling the fire. Let's face it, folks. Many of these conflicts are fueled by external actors more than happy to add fuel to the fire. These actors often come in the form of powerful nations, private military contractors, and even multinational corporations. They have the resources and the influence to tip the scales in favor of one side or another, often prolonging the conflict and increasing the suffering of the local population. Whether it's providing weapons, funding militias, or engaging in good old-fashioned propaganda, these outside players often have their own agendas. These agendas can range from gaining strategic footholds in key regions, securing access to valuable resources, or simply undermining rival powers. The methods they use are varied and often insidious, from covert operations to overt military interventions. And those agendas rarely align with peace and stability. Instead, they often lead to prolonged violence, displacement of civilians, and widespread destruction. The local population is left to bear the brunt of these power plays, with their homes, livelihoods, and futures caught in the crossfire. Take the Syrian civil war, for example. What started as a domestic uprising quickly escalated into a full-blown proxy war, with multiple external actors jumping into the fray. The involvement of these outside forces turned an already complex situation into a multifaceted conflict with no easy solutions. It became a tangled web of competing interests, with Russia, Iran, the United States, Turkey, and various Gulf states all backing different sides. Each of these countries had its own reasons for getting involved, from geopolitical strategy to regional dominance. The result was a chaotic battlefield where alliances shifted frequently, and the lines between friend and foe were often blurred. Each player claimed to be supporting the good guys, but the reality was far more cynical. In truth, their actions were driven by self-interest, with little regard for the well-being of the Syrian people. The humanitarian cost was staggering, with countless lives lost and millions displaced. They were pursuing their own strategic goals, often at the expense of the Syrian people. The international community watched as the conflict dragged on with no end in sight. Efforts to broker peace were repeatedly undermined by the competing interests of these external actors. The conflict in Yemen follows a similar pattern. What began as a civil war quickly attracted the attention of regional and global powers, each with its own agenda. The involvement of these external actors turned a dire situation into a humanitarian disaster. Saudi Arabia, with support from the US and other Western powers, intervened to counter what they saw as Iranian influence in the region. This intervention escalated the conflict, leading to widespread destruction and suffering. The flow of weapons and military support from external actors only served to intensify the fighting. The result? A humanitarian catastrophe and a quagmire that has dragged on for years. The Yemeni people have paid a heavy price, with countless lives lost and a generation growing up in the shadow of war. The international community has struggled to provide adequate aid, hampered by the ongoing violence and political complexities. This isn't to say that external actors are solely responsible for these conflicts. Internal factors, such as political repression, economic inequality, and ethnic tensions, play a significant role. These underlying issues create a fertile ground for conflict, which external actors then exploit for their own purposes. Internal factors such as political repression, economic inequality, and ethnic tensions play a significant role. These issues often create a volatile environment, making it easier for external actors to intervene and manipulate the situation to their advantage. But outside interference often exacerbates these problems, making it harder to achieve lasting peace. The presence of external actors complicates peace negotiations, as each party has its own interests to protect. This makes it difficult to find common ground and reach a sustainable resolution. It's like trying to put out a campfire with gasoline while a bunch of pigeons wearing tiny MAGA hats keep dropping firecrackers. It's a mess. The chaotic involvement of external actors often turns a bad situation into an unmanageable crisis, leaving the local population to suffer the consequences.